Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. So today's video we're going to discuss how you can win your 1v1s and you successfully peak angles to really clutch out those gunfights on Apex Legends. So what we're going to do is roll a clip real quick on where I made a monumental mistake. Oh god, I screwed up, dude. I'm dead.
Oh my gosh.
I screwed up. Now that we've really seen that clip, you're going to notice how much I was hard egoing and pushing right out in the open, which is a fatal mistake that really got me caught out. I knew it was a mistake right when I did it. Unfortunately, I had already overcommitted to where they were peeking me, and I was put in a disadvantage overall in that gunfight. So how do you correct this? Well, it really comes from making the right decisions, knowing when to push. There are some circumstances, we're going to discuss two clips here in just a moment, where the hard ego push can be applicable, and also where you need to be smart in terms of your angles and where you're cutting and peeking on various sides. So let's look into a clip real quick where we discuss how you need to cut the angle. So let's go and play that. So you notice right away the first initial clip here when they were zipping across, I did manage to catch a Pathfinder out of position, which was quite helpful. I did the initial damage. The bow check at this moment was pretty overpowered, did 70 damage. Now, what you'll notice here when I'm pausing again is I immediately cut the angle and I wait until I'm behind cover to charge up the next shot. This is why burst damage weapons are so powerful in these type of scenarios. So if we go onwards here, I did miss my second shot, but I did snag the third one, which is now the Pathfinder's 140 damage in, which is now putting them at a disadvantage because I was side peeking and they weren't able to hit. Now my teammate did clean up the gunfight there, and I take height to get a position, but I do know there's a tree here to provide me some cover fire. Now what's great here is I use my tactical ability to do some extra damage to kind of splash to slow them from my teammates. So it was a disadvantage, and granted we were in Revenant form trying to push because we did have white armors, and I was playing with the randoms as well. This was actually done live on stream where I was just playing with randoms having a good time. But this is really how you win the gunfight, because immediately once I pop that tactical, the Revenant is now pushing all on his own, which was an advantageous position and is now a massive disadvantage. The Revenant goes down, and then the Lifeline gets knocked, and you hear me say, noise. So what we really see here is making sure whenever you're peeking and doing burst damage and taking an angle and taking a fight, that it plays into an advantage for you. Otherwise, if you don't, it's at a disadvantage, which means you're going to lose that potential gunfight. If you can't get the burst damage initially, and you realize that you do not have the armor advantage in that circumstance, you have to reposition and try to go for a different fight. So in this next fight, let's discuss when you push. Now, the interesting part whenever you're pushing in this specific gunfight is that sometimes you may not have an angle. This is a battle royale where a lot of positioning can really change things up. Sometimes you just have an open field. Sometimes you just kind of have to hard ego and realize if you do have a better armor situation and damage has been done, sometimes you don't really have much of a choice but to push. In this circumstance, I had my teammate push in Kaiser, and he did a lot of damage, which is a sign for us once there's a lot of damage rolled out, and now we're at advantage. There's a 3v2 situation immediately from that circumstance to make a push. This is when you make a play, even if I didn't have the angle. So we did get a little bit of damage. He called that he was low and he was cracked, so if I pause, you'll notice I did a little bit more damage, but I know I have gold armor. I have my teammate Leonessa right behind as well, knowing that she's there to help with some cover fire. I know she's got a little distance, but we do still have the advantage, and if I have the better armors, especially with gold armor, this is still a potential win. Immediately they know they're in a disadvantage because Kaiser called before that they were low. I get the crack, and now there's two people flush. I have still full armor, and I can definitely sell if I need to. But what is noticeable here, and sometimes audio can be very difficult in Apex Legends, is immediately he takes a jump pad to try to get out. Once he does that, I know that the other guy did not have a moment to heal, so I hard ego push him, and once I fly right in, boom, there's the cleanup. So sometimes you don't necessarily always have to peek, but know when you have the advantage to kind of hard ego push, which you saw in the other fight, which doesn't always work. You notice from the first clip, you need to get the peek damage and get the initial crack and information, because information is key on how you peek. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to hop into Aim Lab and really going to break down how do you peek an angle. Remember that in most video games like Valorant, CSGO, even Battlefield or Call of Duty Warzone, that everyone always falls into a predictable position or angle. There's only so many different variables in which way somebody can get you or shoot at you. So what we're going to do is we're going to break it down in AimLab because it is a free-to-play software, meaning that you all can hop in literally right now and practice this way. CSGO is also free. There's also some exercises there in how to kind of enter a room, and you can also do this in Valorant. We'll do a little exercise at the end on Apex, which is more of a demonstration and how you cut an angle and how you peek when you enter a room. You're probably wondering how a lot of pros always catch you out and always discover where you're at. Well, again, when we break this down in AimLab in just a moment, I'll explain to you just how predictable everyone always is at various angles. So let's segue right over. Now for this portion of the video, what we're going to do is showcase in AimLab how to enter a room. The biggest mistake all individual players do is they run in, and then boom, you're being hit. So what you need to do to really improve this is you learn to peek and cut an angle. As you cut an angle, you have your crosshair always around head level, which is important. You'll notice as you cut the corner where enemy players are always going to be located. We're going to do this a little slower. We're not going to really rush through this. You always notice where you can cut and where you've just checked your prior angle. So as you're cutting, you'll have your crosshairs at head level, so then you can maximize and minimize on the amount of time it takes for you to aim. And as you do this, you'll only get faster and better at it, as I'm missing some of my shots because I'm trying to talk as we're doing this. But you'll notice where you're cutting angles and where enemies can be. So here's another example most players do. They'll run forward, but look how many places that you're shot from. This is a great example realizing just how many spots enemies can be at, essentially. And it can be very overwhelming, but remember, every time you shoot, you are giving away information to the enemy and where they could potentially be. And remember, as you're cutting angles and looking, and sometimes even being in the center, this is not necessarily a bad spot right now because you've already cleared all of those angles. Just remember where everyone could potentially be as you cut various angles and you take different spots. And you'll make mistakes and you'll do this better. I'm going to do a run where we really have a good run rather than me just trying to talk through it and have a poor example of this. So I'm going to put my arm sleeve on. I'm going to change my sensitivity since I was practicing at a lower one and I realized my sensitivity was way slower for what I was demonstrating, which is not very good. So let me change this. And why I do that is sometimes I practice and train at lower sensitivities. And this one was 58 centimeters, which is really low. Let me go back to my normal, which is 15.25. Let's change this. Apologies, I'm doing this mid-video, but I think this is also a good teaching lesson. 15.25. Okay, so we have the new settings there, right? And then we're going to go through this as, well, efficiently as possible as we're cutting angles. And the reason why this pertains even to Apex Legends is that targets can only realistically be in a certain number of spots. And I'll showcase this in the test range on Apex in just a moment. But as you really cut and you look at the various angles of where enemies can be, you will find that everyone can be very much predictable. And you can start to move through rooms, and it's all about getting that first shot. You want to have everything at head level, and the hard part about Apex Legends is that not every character has the same height, which can be also very difficult because you have to adjust versus a Watson, a Wraith. There's many different legends that you have to worry about in terms of their height and how they move. So this, you'll get better at this. And again, still talking while I do it. I've had higher scores than this. This is not my best score. But I'm hoping the example that I'm giving you gives you the foresight on how you cut angles. I remember at one point I had a top 100. I guarantee I don't anymore because everyone gets really good at these. And they really improve a lot. Like I'm standing out way out too much in the open. And this is a mistake where I like to reset back to bases and where you're slicing the pie. Remember, slicing the pie is cutting the angle, so I made a major mistake there if I were to reset this. So let's talk about, again, slicing the pie, because I feel like I'm kind of doing this a little bit out of order. Slicing the pie, crosshair center, you cut, you're like, imagine this was a giant pie and you're seeing where your body is, so in conjunction of where the enemy is at. So you cut, and then you see them, and then you stop to get your headshot. And in games like Valorant and CSGO, you have to completely stop to be accurate. In games like Apex, you don't necessarily need to. You can just, jiggle peek and go back and forth, really throw off your enemy. But if you have this basis down for any first-person shooter, I promise you, you're going to be a much better player for it. Now, just to give an example, once you're in Apex Legends, how you realistically can cut an angle and cut a corner, it's really once you're holding a spot. Let me turn down the audio, make sure it's not too loud as we're commentating over this. It's just the quick peek. You'll see a peek, you go right back and forth, and that's really how you do your burst damage. But much like how we were explaining before, how you enter a building, and we'll go through, I think, one more example here at the end of the video, just because I don't want this video to be too long, because I already know it is. Let's pretend there's a door here. When you enter, the same thing. You go right in. Either you slide jump in, because you know where the enemy's at, and throw them off. You probably see that entry happen a lot as well. But if you know where the enemy is at and you've already scanned and you look in, you can definitely cut in, use your movement to your advantage. Because this, again, this is not Valorant, this is not CSGO, this is Apex Legends, where movement is really key. So you can cut different angles and use this as like a jump and a surprise as you really cut. So unlike CSGO and Valorant, where you need to be completely still and stagnant, you can utilize Apex for its movement and to where you're cutting an angle and really getting in. Because this can also be good as you're kind of peeking back and forth and making yourself hard to hit, or you can go in, but realize that if you miss your slide jump once you go in, then you're pretty much going to die. But it does make the other target that's standing there stationary, so you can do a few exercises to work on this. One of them I recommend is essentially kind of doing 180 and then slide jumping, and then if you miss your shots like I just did right there, then you know that you need to work on it. And you'll get better and better at it. Another one you can do is whenever you're kind of wall bouncing, you can use your aim and accuracy to kind of just get to the movement, because that movement, whenever you're cutting an angle or trying to get away, can definitely be beneficial to kind of get the one up on the peak, essentially. So doing that exercise can be monumental and very helpful. That one is a little bit less on peaking, and same thing whenever you're cutting an angle and seeing where they're at, and realize how small the movement that you need to make whenever you are controlling your mouse, whenever you're doing kind of the jiggle peek, and how small it is. And you can turn on these bots still and it still works, and how small the movement needs to be. And I just did a video on micro tracking just a few days ago, but how small that movement is. And you can realize the same whenever you use a spray weapon, especially on Apex Legends. You're not using bursts like a wingman, a mastiff, anything along those lines. Let's say you're using a burst weapon, how you're doing with the spray, because if somebody else is using a burst weapon, how bad that can be if you get a lot of damage and take a different angle, then slide in. This is where you see a lot of individual players use the different angles to kind of peek, to kind of get that initial shots in, and then you go for a cleanup. Because the problem is if you peek too long at an angle, and I do this all the time, and I'm calling myself out for it, if you're up here, by the time they flick and shoot, there is a potential that they can actually knock you and kill you. Let's say if I were to get shot at for 2 seconds and I flick, and then, you know, pretty much go for like a 2-tap or 3-tap to the head, well, that circumstance now goes in the favor of the other player. So remember, when you're using a spray weapon, how much you're spraying, how much confident you are, how much damage you've taken, what they're doing back to you, and realize how the tables can turn even if you are in an advantageous position. I really hope that you guys have found this video helpful. I figured it might help somebody out there kind of create the basis. Remember, because this is a battle royale, just how positioning really works, especially if you're using even something as simple as this as you're cutting an angle to make yourself harder to hit. Remember, all your angles, all your positioning, and in a battle royale, it's a lot more difficult because there is so much in a map as we look over that you can utilize. It's not as straightforward like a CSGO or Valorant, where you just have a single pathway and hallway. Enemy players can be in every which angle, and it's your job to deduce where they could possibly be. This gets easier as you play smarter players who have the experience. I lack for a better word, not smarter, but better players who have a lot more experience in how they cut angles. This can be very hard at lower tier lobbies around like gold or even platinum, where they're unpredictable and they do things that may not be as orthodox. So they could literally just come and jump out of nowhere and just start shooting you and roll up right on you, and you're like, well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Why didn't they cut the angle, or why didn't they peek me, and why did they just full send it? So these are all the questions you have to ask. If you enjoyed, don't forget to leave a like. I can do a checklist as well. We'll do a follow-up video on a checklist on when to push and when not to push. I know I said we're wrapping up the video, but I wanted to showcase just one more clip to kind of end on, specifically for Arena, because I realized I didn't have any Arena-specific clips. But I want to discuss this clip where I was utilizing the wingman and the cover that I'm at. So I noticed my team was fighting over around the right, and the position that I took and the angle here took me, and it was an advantage. I was cutting a different angle. I knew exactly where they're at in front of me. And I look here and I fly in. where I'm positioned where you see currently, meaning the only thing they can see is from my upper body up. If anything, all they can see is my head. So I can see them and their bodies are completely exposed and I got a headshot, right? So I got one flush, and I know we have a full advantage and that their team is panicking. I get shot over from the right, but realize because my hitbox is smaller, he whiffed his shot. So I reloaded and I hide here. Realized that this position that I took was now monumental to winning this gunfight. I pause it for just a moment so you can see it. And I snagged that extra headshot right there. So that's pretty huge, that headshot. And let me roll down this audio just in case it kind of loops back. So what we see here, I take a few extra shots, but I have a nice angle here. And I take the angle, but I'm using this countertop here to make me a harder target to hit. Because of this, I was a harder target to hit. I move in knowing that I have the confidence to move on this. And I was using them also, the down targets, as my enemy shields. And there we go, clean it up. So that was a strong, pretty much a 1v3, but my teammates were there to really help me solidify the deal. So I figured to just end off on this clip. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.